I have been blessed with an incredible life. I get to do amazing things that I'm so grateful for, and I don't want to forget them. Big things, small things, any of it. I've realized there are so many things that I remember only because I spent time with the story documenting it.
Welcome to Scrapbook Your Way, the show that explores the breadth of ways to be a memory keeper today. I'm your host, Jennifer Wilson, owner of Simple Scrapper and author of The New Rules of Scrapbooking. This is episode 201. In this episode, I'm joined by Youngmi An to chat about defining and refining your creative process in scrapbooking. We dive into the details of how this Simple Scrapper member crafts a consistent, cohesive approach. This is one of 2 episodes that close out the 4th year of the Scrapbook Your Way podcast. We're taking a short break and we'll return with new episodes on January 23rd. I'm so grateful for your support of the show, for every listen, every comment, and every share. You may have noticed we don't take outside sponsorship. Scrapbook Your Way is made possible by listeners who become Simple Scrapper members. Our community is built around supporting you, keeping your memories your way. We have an amazing schedule for 2023, including our first retreat of the year in a few weeks. Visit simplescrapper.com/membership to learn more about our creative community. And now, my conversation with Youngmi An. Hey Youngmi, welcome to Scrapbook Your Way.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yes, I am looking forward to our conversation so much, and I think we're going to have a good one today. Can you start by sharing a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So my name is Youngmi An. I've been scrapbooking since high school, so that's like 20 some odd years if you want to do the math and figure out how old I am. I live in California with my husband. We're child-free, but I am a very proud auntie and emo to the most amazing nieces and nephews. I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago and then went to college at the University of Illinois, where I met my future husband.
Wait. I did not know this part.
Yes. Yeah.
That's super cool.
Yeah, it's such a great campus. I absolutely loved my time there, and I miss it a lot sometimes.
We're in my university job, we're currently interviewing some people, and almost everyone doesn't live here, but used to, and so they all want to come back. It's so crazy.
Yeah, it's such a gorgeous campus, and there are just so many opportunities to just have like that most amazing college experience. So I'm not surprised that people want to go back. Like I would love to go back someday.
Yeah, that'd be really cool. And if you ever visit, definitely let me know. So
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's okay. That's totally okay. After graduation, we moved to Boston, where we lived for 10 years before we moved across the country to Santa Barbara, California. So that was a huge change, but definitely one we were ready for.
Santa Barbara versus Central Illinois. I mean, we do have like nice fall festivals and stuff, but still.
Yeah, which I definitely miss a lot, especially this time of year. Like to be honest, a week ago, I didn't know what month it was because every day looks and feels the same. Like I used to mark the passage of time with seasons, and that doesn't exist here. But thankfully, we just have one nice season.
That's good. Yeah, I lived in Riverside for 2 years, and we had a lot of not so nice seasons, but there were some nice ones too.
Yeah, it's lovely here, and I encourage anybody to visit. It's very easy to get used to.
Yes, I bet. So what's exciting you right now in memory keeping?
So I'm not sure if it's because the 90s are making a comeback right now, but I'm really loving the idea of documenting my childhood and teenage years. So my mom recently sold my childhood home, so I had the pleasure of sorting through 18 years of my life that had been stored there. And I feel like there were just so many fun stories to tell, like about my Jenko jeans, which to this day are still like the most precious article of clothing I've ever owned, or like my Cabbage Patch Kid doll, and music. Like recently, in the last issue of Spark magazine, I think it was Shannon Manton who shared a project that she did of 100 songs that changed my life. And as soon as I saw that, I immediately started writing down all these songs that evoke certain memories or occupy just a very distinct moment in time. And it spiraled out of control very fast. And I ended up with like 200 songs. So
Oh
I'm
my
gonna,
gosh, that's awesome.
yeah, I'm gonna have to pare that down a little bit, obviously. But even just making the list was so much fun. So I don't do a lot of retrospective layouts, but I think it would be really interesting to tell those stories with the perspective that I have now.
Yes, yes, yes. And so Shannon actually was on the podcast in our very first few months, and she's been on since, but talking about this particular project. And so I will link that episode in the show notes where she goes into a lot more detail about the inspiration and the process for creating the 100 Songs I Changed My Life album.
Yeah, it's such a cool idea. I love it.
Yes, yes. And so obviously that spurred a lot of stories for you. Do you have any really big stories that are on your bucket list, things that feel really important to tell?
Yeah, I mean, I have a ton. I feel like a lot of scrapbookers haven't scrapped their wedding for some bizarre reason, so that's one of them. But the biggest one that's also the most intimidating to me is my family history.
Mm-hmm.
And there are two really big challenges to this. And the first is photos. On my dad's side, there really are no photos that I know of from when he was young. We have a few from when he was a young adult, but nothing older than that. And it wasn't until recently that I realized this and it kind of clicked, but I think it's likely because of the Korean War. My dad was about 5 years old when the war began. And so my best guess is that either photos never existed of him in his childhood or they
Mm-hmm.
were lost during that time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's definitely a bummer. It's like kind of like a hole in our family
Mm-hmm.
history. And then the second challenge is the stories. So, in my family, and I know a lot of families struggle with this, there's an unspoken understanding that you don't talk about things or ask about things that are sad or painful. And unfortunately for us, that includes a lot of our family history because both my parents lived through some really difficult things that I'll never know about.
Mm-hmm.
And on one hand, I've come to respect that they don't want us to know. So even though I think those stories are important and I want to know them, ultimately, those are their stories to share or to not. So when I am lucky enough to kind of catch these bits of family history, I try to scribble it down somewhere because I'll take whatever I can get. But I'm not sure how to kind of document these random bits of story and like miscellaneous photos. So that's something that hopefully I'll figure out someday, but it would be kind of like a monumental lifelong project.
Yeah, it seems like you need to kind of create a home for it that you can add to over time.
Yeah, and I feel like the way we scrapbook now, it's very much like we have a photo and we have the story that goes with the photo.
Yeah.
But with kind of these older stories and photos, there's not usually like a one-to-one that go
Yeah.
together like that. Um,
Or
but
even,
yeah.
pocket pages, like, you can have a photo and a story or a photo and story pair.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And on my mom's side, we're lucky enough that my grandfather was into photography, so
Mm-hmm.
we have more photos of that side of the family than I think a lot of others who lived during that time period and in that area do. Um, so I don't know. Maybe I have my mom is the youngest of nine,
Oh,
um,
wow.
and I'm the youngest cousin in that generation. So
Yeah.
I have a lot of cousins. I have a lot like feels like hundreds of cousins. Probably an exaggeration, but sometimes it feels like 100 cousins
Mm-hmm.
to kind of mine for information. So hopefully I can get some stories through them.
Well, and I also think the kind of meta story about the cultural norms of not talking about some of the harder things and how that was the expectation in your family. And I think that is a story in itself to maybe, even start off this project.
Yeah, absolutely.
That, there always will be gaps because, this is what was important and a value to my parents, and maybe sharing the contrast with what your current values are.
Yeah, that's a perspective that I hadn't thought of. Just how we've changed and we talk more.
Yeah.
I love that. That's great.
Well, and maybe in the future there'll be, inroads and a meeting in the middle as you share more of your perspective on memory keeping with your family, and maybe things will pour out.
Yeah.
All right, so I absolutely love how you use different techniques and formats to document your memories and tell your story. And your body of work feels so cohesive. You are a lovely scrapbooker. And I'd love to focus this episode on kind of teasing apart your creative process and how you make decisions.
Sure. Well, and thank you for that, by the way.
Oh, you're welcome. Yes, I am. Yeah, I've just been so enamored with the things that you've created, particularly in the past few years as you've been a member. So maybe we can start by hearing all about the different page and project approaches you use currently in your memory keeping and crafting.
Sure. So I'm always working on multiple projects at once. And so right now, that includes kind of everyday stories that go in a yearly album. I'm working on a Hawaii vacation album, an Italy vacation album, and I've got kind of an ongoing Disney album. I work in multiple formats. So right now it's 12 by 12, 9 by 12, 8.5 by 11, which it was actually a bit of a shift for me because up until a couple of years ago, I was like a very hardcore 12 by 12 person, but I wanted to try some smaller formats because those 12 by 12 albums are enormous. Like they're extremely heavy. They're like kind of difficult to flip through.
Yes.
So I'm like, I need to make these a little bit smaller, and I'm running out of space very fast. So um, my albums tend to be a mix of full page layouts and pocket pages, which you'll see that especially in my travel albums, where I'm just trying to get in as many photos as I can. Um, and I also keep a memory planner, which I love because I feel like that's kind of like my playground, and it lets me be creative in a different style from my scrapbooks. It's a place for me to capture like those tiny stories that don't really make it onto a layout. And so these days, more than my scrapbook, my memory planner is really what is capturing like my everyday life.
Oh, that's so fun. I'm curious, has that been an evolution? Have you ever done kind of a traditional project life and now the memory planner is taking that place, or no?
Kind of. So I did I'm like looking behind me at my shelf. I did 3 years of project life. And it was fun, like kind of collecting like little bits, like I don't know, like stickers or tags or tickets and things like that. And I would put doodles in there. It was really different from my regular scrapbooks, but I felt very constrained by the pockets themselves. And it was like giving me a lot of stress. So I kind of abandoned that. But this memory planner is kind of a return to that, where I don't feel like things have to match. Like it's very scrappy in the traditional sense, I guess. Like it's
Yeah.
chaotic. There's no design, and I love it that it is that way. Like it's just lots of stickers and washi tape, and I can. That's where I let out like my cutesy side, and I play with like Zaka style, and um, it's just a lot of fun. It feels very freeing.
Oh, I love to hear that. So when you have time to create and you're sitting down to your desk, how do you decide what it is that you're going to work on? Are you kind of in the moment person, or have you kind of already planned that out in advance?
So a little bit of both. So I do very loose planning because I've learned that I can't force anything when it comes to scrapbooking. I need to have my options so I can just go with whatever is speaking to me at that moment. So I keep a running list of stories that I want to tell, just scribbled into a notebook. Then I have an album on my phone of photos to scrap. So every once in a while, when I'm like waiting in line or I'm like on a flight or something, I'll go through my camera roll and add photos to that album. So between those two, whether I'm feeling inspired by photos or by the story, I can always find something to scrap.
Oh, I love that. I think we all kind of take inspiration from different places, and I love how you're kind of using your little pockets of time to make sure the inspiration is waiting for you.
Yeah, and I've realized that like it's helped me to become more productive too, just to have that running list of stories. Because I have a terrible memory, so like I'll forget. Like, so writing it down has helped a lot, and it's always I love that feeling of being able to check something off. I find that very satisfying.
Oh, I think you're not alone on that for sure. Yeah, I think it'll be in a random place where I come up with a story idea. And those are the ones that I really need to like mark down because it probably wasn't related to a specific photo. It was a connection between things or a conversation with someone. And I think those are some of the most fun pages to make because they maybe wouldn't have been sparked otherwise.
Yeah.
So when you are creating, what about the creative starting point? Are you starting with that story? Are you starting with a photo or a particular product?
So it can be all three, and it varies because in order for me to actually create a layout, there needs to be like this special magic that
Yeah.
happens. I need to have the perfect combination of supplies, story, photo, and design. And if one of those things is missing, it just won't happen no matter how hard I try. Like when I was a chronological scrapbooker, I would try to force myself to scrapbook certain photos in a certain order, and all I would do is just like stare at my desk. So once I freed myself of that expectation and I let myself scrapbook whatever I wanted at the moment, I was so much more productive. I loved my layouts a lot more, and I just enjoyed the process a lot because when all those things align, it's just such a great feeling and everything comes together like it's meant to be and it just like flows.
Now I'm curious, do you have any strategies that you use to cultivate the magic or things that you know support you in finding that state of flow?
I think a lot of it has to do with just over time learning what works for me. Like what kind of supplies I like to use, even just like layouts, like like how many photos do I like? And that I think just comes with doing it over time and trying out different things. Because once I figured out, like, okay, this is how I like to scrapbook, this is what I like in the layouts that that are my favorites, and I can kind of return to those things. It's almost like it's become not routine necessarily, but just kind of comfortable in my scrapbooking.
Oh, I love that. And I'm sure that kind of leads to that cohesiveness in your body of work, if you will, that you kind of have this comfort zone that feels good and keeps you in that magic zone.
Yeah. So, I mean, sometimes I like to pop out of it and, whether or not I like what comes out of those times, it's fine either way. Like, obviously, I don't love every single layout that I make. But it's always fun to experiment and try something new so that, things don't feel stale.
Well, and on that note, do you like to follow along with like challenges and things like that that might lead you to like starting from a different place or using another point of inspiration?
Absolutely. I really actually love challenges. And once I figured this out, felt like I became even more productive because I mean, one of the things, it gets me to use products that I may not have reached for or think of stories that weren't necessarily on my little list. Um, and most challenges come with a deadline for submissions. So it gives me like this
Yes.
extra boost of motivation to get me to finish and, stop kind of like hemming and hawing over little decisions and be like, just go for it. Don't overthink it and get it done, get it scrapped.
Yes, yes, yes. I think the deadlines are something that helps a lot of us as well. Now, I noticed that you love to use cut files. So when you use these as part of a project, is that kind of the starting point? You just say, I'm going to use a cut file today, or is that something that comes in later in the creative process?
It's usually a starting point for me because every once in a while I'll see a cut file and I'll be like, yes, I know exactly which photo would be perfect for that cut file. So usually that's where I'm starting. And also a lot of times, if I've taken a break from scrapbooking or I'm just, kind of feeling like I'm in a bit of a slump, I'll pick a cut file and make a layout because it goes pretty quickly. It's almost like meditative, if you will,
Oh, yeah.
and doesn't require a lot of decision making. Well, it depends on how you use it, but because I like to back my cut files with lots of different pattern papers. And so that process, like that's the kind of like meditative process for me. I know a lot of people find that very stressful though. And normally I don't do a whole lot of embellishing on top. So it goes pretty fast. But the most time consuming part is when my machine doesn't properly cut out all the corners and then I have to
Oh,
snip them out
yes.
all by hand. So essentially the machine cuts it once and then I cut it again by hand. And so I really need to adjust my settings, but yeah.
You could even tell it to cut twice too, or 3 times.
I know. Sometimes I do that just because I'm like, oh, I really don't feel like gambling
Yes.
today, so I'll just have it cut
Mhm.
twice and it'll take like 45 minutes to cut the file.
Yes, it can be frustrating. Now, when you are backing your cut files with pattern paper and the stained glass window pane effect, like what's your strategy for doing that? Because I've seen a lot of different ways that people like to do that.
I do probably just like the most basic way. I know there's a way to have the machine cut it for you, but I I'm not sure. I think that's supposedly faster, but I weirdly don't have the patience for that. So I will cut out like a tiny scrap of paper that's about the right size and shape. I'll glue it onto the back and then trim around it.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen like a lot of different ways, and so I'm always curious, like, what's your preferred method from, the very precise, we're gonna tweak the cut file to cut the backgrounds, or we're gonna, make it work.
Yeah. I mean, with cut files that kind of have bigger pieces, I'll
Hmm.
save the cutout parts. And I can use that kind of guide. Like, I'll take a piece of paper and trim it to just a little bit bigger.
Oh, yeah.
But that doesn't work for like the really intricate ones where it's just like 1,000 tiny circles. Um, but like I did that recently on a cut file that was words. So the openings were much bigger. And so that worked well for that. But usually it's just kind of the old school glue it onto the back and trim it off.
Nice, nice. Now, do you have any advice for someone who wants to include more cut files on their pages? Because I hear this a lot. Like, I want to learn how to use my silhouette. I want to actually use all these cut files that I've purchased. Um, Suggestions.
Yeah, so they really are so versatile, and there's just so many amazing cut files out there. But I think if you're new to them or if you're kind of intimidated by them, I say start with something really simple like the large title. Anything with like big openings, those tend to be easier to back. Or if you like the look of intricate cut files, but the thought of doing like that backing process that I said gives you hives, then you don't need to do it. Like there's so many other options. You can watercolor behind it or even just leave it as is. Like I think intricate white cut files look really striking against a darker background and like vice versa. So there's just so many different ways to use them. But I think the most important thing, at least for me, what I've learned is just make sure that your tools and supplies are right for the job. Because even if your cut settings are absolutely perfect, you won't get a good cut if you're using lower quality paper or your blades are dull or your cutting mat needs to be replaced. So it really is worth it to use the good stuff.
Oh, that's a great piece of advice. I love that. I think, particularly in this scenario, that really makes a difference. Some scenarios in scrapbooking, it doesn't, but in this one, it really does.
Yeah, and that's something that, for years I was getting like terrible cuts, everything was ripping, and
Hmm.
I couldn't figure out what it was. Because, at the time I was on an extremely small budget as a scrapbooker. And so I was trying to like stretch my supplies. I was using like cheaper cardstock. And then finally, when I was like, okay, I'm actually wasting more time and money
Hmm.
by not keeping my supplies in good condition. And so once I made the switch, I was like, oh my gosh, my life has been changed.
Yes, yes. And I also want to double down on your suggestion to not choose something overly intricate when you start out. My first cut with my original silhouette, this is many years ago now, was a doily, and that was a huge mistake.
Oh no.
I just thought it was just going to be this magical miracle tool that just could cut anything out, and I just have to like lift it up. And yeah, I had no idea. So, needless to say, that didn't work out so well.
Oh no.
So, are there any tools or other shortcuts that you regularly turn to or rely on to figure out how your page is going to come together? Like, how do you compose your pages?
Yeah, absolutely. I am all about sketches. I think in the past, a lot of us kind of had this like hesitation with using sketches, like
Hmm.
that thought of like, am I really a scrapbooker? Am I really a creative if I'm just copying a design that someone else created? And I definitely felt that way. And it was like this weird insecurity that I had until I heard something that Shamel said once about how, as scrapbookers, we put an enormous amount of pressure on ourselves to create like a completely unique design with every project that we make. And that's not something you see in other hobbies. Like other crafts like quilting and knitting and cross stitch, like they rely on patterns that are meant to be copied and adapted.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I view sketches because a blank canvas can be really intimidating to me because there are just so many possibilities. But sketches help me jumpstart that creative process. Sometimes I'll follow it exactly, sometimes I won't, but having that starting point just helps me scrap faster and easier. And, if you're like me, the thought of all the stories that you want to scrap but you don't have time to like keeps you up at night. So like sketches can just really help you get those stories into your albums.
Yes, yes. And even like, using your own designs from the past, if you have a layout that you really love, make it use different products, different photos, use the same, use yourself as the sketch and it will come out beautifully and you probably won't even realize that it's the same design. So,
Yeah, I scrap lift myself all the time, and especially since, like I mentioned, I have multiple albums going at one time. So if I
mhm.
make a layout where I'm like, "Oh man, I really nailed it with this design," I'll be like, "Well, I have a couple other albums, so I'll just like scrap lift myself and make like 2 more versions of it, and they'll probably never be seen side by side, but it again helps me get those photos into my albums."
Well, I think that's like another comfort zone place. The more that you can kind of understand, I can make pages that look kind of like this all day long and without stress, then do that, as much as you want to. So, do you have any colors or patterns that you regularly reach for more than others? I was like going through your Instagram and seeing if I could like pull out some trends here.
So, color-wise, I realized that I do have kind of like a palette, but it wasn't intentionally because I didn't even realize it until a while ago, but I feel like 80% of my layouts are pink, teal, and yellow. And I don't know, that color combination just brings me so much joy and, it does appear in different shades, but it got to the point where I was like, "Okay, I need to buy some green supplies." There's, like, no green in my scrap room, and once in a while, like, I'll need a color that isn't pink, teal, or yellow,
Yeah.
and then I'm like, "Oh, no." So I'm, like, trying to, like, add, like, diversify and because I love all colors. It's just something about those 3 together just, it just makes me so happy.
Oh, I love hearing that. I think that we all need to know what colors really, as you said, bring you joy and to reach for more of that in many areas of life. I think that makes a difference in, how we feel about all the things that we're doing and creating.
Yeah. And then in regards to patterns, patterns can be a little tricky for me. I love kind of all the generic stuff like florals and stripes, but the really themed ones like houses and cacti really trip me up. So you actually don't
Yes.
see a lot of those types of patterns in my layouts, but you'll see a lot of tone on tone subtle patterns. Those are like my bread and butter. I love that they lend detail to a page, but that they can also read as a solid, so it doesn't add like too much chaos to the page. So when I'm pulling together supplies for a layout, I often start with a multicolored pattern paper, like a floral, and then pull in those subtle single colored patterned papers that coordinate. And sometimes I feel like that is like my favorite part of the creative process. And it's something that I can do if I just have a couple minutes here or there. Like I actually have a stack of like, I wouldn't even call them kits, but just like stacks of paper where I'm like, okay, these are the papers that I want to use together on a layout at some point.
I thought I was the only person that did that. Like, I'll go through my pattern
Oh,
paper stash and I'll see, like, I've kind of coordinated some things together for, like, a future page. And I'm like, oh,
yeah.
these look really nice together.
Yeah, and I mean, just like so when I am ready to scrap, like, I kind of have like like almost a kit ready to go, but
Mm-hmm.
I just, we love pattern paper as scrapbookers and it's just fun to kind of sift through them sometimes and just, pair them together.
Yes, I agree. So fun. And I definitely start with, like, that multicolored first. So I think we have a similar process there. Now, I noticed that you have a fair amount of journaling on your pages, sometimes even a lot of journaling. Why
Mhm.
is the story aspect so important to you?
So, oh gosh, there's a lot of answers to that, but hopefully I can say this in a way that makes sense. But um so I guess probably like the main reason why my layouts almost always have journaling is that I have a terrible memory. So I have been blessed with an incredible life. I get to do amazing things that I'm so grateful for, and I don't want to forget them, like big things, small things, any of it. So, I've realized there are so many things that I remember only because I spent time with the story documenting it. So, my scrapbooks are almost like a giant journal for me that I get to refer back to and, recall happy moments and things like that. And looking at photos are a lot of fun and obviously they can evoke memories, but when you have a story written down that goes with that photo, I feel like it just brings it to life in a way that,
Mm.
the photo alone can't. I very much scrapbook for myself and my husband because, as I mentioned, we're child free. But I've realized that as I document my life, I'm also documenting the lives of my friends and family because, obviously the stories I'm telling are from my perspective, but these people, they're part of my story. And it's not often that people look through my albums, but when they do, I want them to remember moments in their lives. I want to help them remember.
I love that. Thank you for sharing so thoroughly about all the different reasons. I could tell from your pages that it's important to you and that it's something that you value as part of your creative process.
Yeah.
Now, I'm curious when you're designing your page, like, are you thinking about the amount of journaling space you might need? How does that kind of all fit together? And at the same time, like, how are you creating homes for the journaling on your pages?
So I'm actually kind of bad at estimating how much space my journaling will need or just how much story will actually come out of, once I actually sit down to write it. So you would think that I would be able to eyeball it now, but a lot of times I feel like I either have too much story or not enough. But for times when I know that I am going to have like a huge story, I just plan for an extra page of just journaling. For example, when I made a layout about my laser eye surgery, I ended up with one page with photos and then one double-sided page of size 10 font typed journaling, which I
Wow.
realize is totally ridiculous. I don't expect anybody to ever read it. Um,
But
but
you
just
had something
like
to say. So, I mean,
oh,
there's a lot you
yeah.
can say about that.
Yeah, and again, it was just for my own self, like, oh gosh, again, it was too much story and it really was just for me. But, for an average size story, um, I kind of scribble it out. I scribble out a draft of what I want to say on a scrap piece of paper so that I can kind of estimate how much space I'll need. And, if it's more than what I was expecting, I'll type it up and print it just because you can get more on there.
Oh, yeah.
Even though
Yeah.
my handwriting is kind of small, yeah, you can get so much more if you print it out. Um, but if I truly run out of space for journaling, that's when pockets and flip ups come in handy and you
Hmm.
can always make room for journaling.
Yes, yes, yes. I love that. I love how you have kind of sweetest strategies and you recognize that you'll just do what it takes to get those words down when they want to come out.
Hmm.
So I think in observing your pages, you have maybe incorporated more hybrid techniques over the past few years. Is that accurate? Or have you always been like a hybrid scrapbooker?
It's so funny because I don't really think of myself as a hybrid scrapbooker, but um, I almost like don't even know the
Do you print
definition. I do
things?
print things. Does that make me a hybrid scrapbooker? Because
I mean, if you print something other than photos, then yeah, I would say
really,
so.
okay, all right. I guess I am a hybrid scrapbooker. Um,
Like you print your journaling, maybe you print some type of like things that you cut out by hand.
yeah,
Um,
definitely.
Even using cut files definitely counts as hybrid.
Oh, I never thought of it that way. Okay, cool.
It's really just like anything that you do to use your computer, um, typically beyond photos, just because, we kind of have to use some sort of technology for our photos these days.
Yeah. Yeah. So I did, obviously I definitely print my journaling a lot of the times. There are a lot of really cool printables available now.
Hmm.
Um, and oh, they're so dangerous because, price point is great and they don't take up any like physical storage space. Like, yeah, I can get into a lot of trouble with like
Yeah.
printables. But they're so budget friendly because you can print them as many times as you want and use them on multiple layouts. And It's great for what I like to call, oh gosh, like quote unquote emergency situations where I'm like in the groove and, I just need one last thing to finish my layout, but I don't have it. And it's like 11 o'clock at night. So it's not like I'm going to run out to a store and buy it. So it's like, well, what can I download? Like, what can I print? What can I cut out? To help fill in that space and get this done. So it really does come in handy for those moments.
I love that. That's the first time I've ever heard heard about a scrapbooking emergency and that printables were the solution for it. So I love it. I think we've all had some sort of emergency. Usually it's like running out of adhesive for me or ink for my printer. But yeah, I think, they are so helpful in being able to, or even technology more broadly, to be able to do that one last piece of customization where you can't find the exact right thing that you want to include.
Yeah. And they're also great for past collections because, there are some like past scrapbooking collections that were my absolute favorites. And I'm like, I wish I had bought buckets of this because I could use it forever. A lot of times they're available digitally. So, you can print out pattern papers, you can print out die cuts and use them forever.
I love that. And I think maybe part of it is the evolution has come from the availability of these products too, that they're just so much more available, both from, smaller boutique brands and the big manufacturers.
Yes.
So are you thinking about or planning for your 2023 scrapbooking yet?
Okay, that's that's a funny question because I have not scrapped a single photo from 2022 even. Which is really unusual based on how I scrap these days. But what happened is I couldn't decide on what format and size I wanted to use. And then the next thing I knew, it's like October and the year is coming to a close. But looking into 2023, I definitely want to start exploring other formats like traveler's notebook sized albums for documenting things like vacations and, stories that are a little bit bigger than something that would go in just like my annual albums because like I mentioned, the way I'm scrapbooking now, it's not sustainable. I'm running out of room. We're going to need to buy a second house. And and I just, I can't keep up with all the things that I want to document. I don't ever see myself ever going 100% digital just because I love physical product too much. So I'm going to have to shrink my album size down and maybe change my approach. I do think my everyday like annual albums will remain in 12 by 12 or 8.5 by 11, but I don't know. I'm excited to test out traveler's notebooks. Because, well, first of all, it's going to be a challenge because the canvas size is so different than what I'm used to. And I think just the approach that people use for traveler's notebooks is really different as well. But I've been super inspired by all the amazing things that people are doing with this size and like how they make it like interactive and there's like, things that flip out. I love that kind of thing. So I'm very excited about that.
Well, and I think maybe some of your memory planner techniques would adapt well, even though the format's a little bit smaller.
Yes, yeah.
So, well, that'll be fun to see what you explore in the new year. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing all the things you create.
Thank you.
Can you share where we can find you online and maybe anything else you might be working on towards the end of this year?
So I'm pretty active on Instagram. My handle is scrappytoki. And in case you're wondering what that means, so Toki means bunny in Korean. And I just absolutely love bunnies. So my name is Scrappy Toki. And I'm in the Simple Scrapper community. You can often spot me in the weekend Zoom crops. So say hi if you see me.
Nice. Looking forward to it. Yeah, I love hanging out with you. Youngmi, this has been such a delightful conversation. Thanks so much for spending time with me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This was really wonderful to talk about all things scrapbooking with you.
Yes. And to all of our listeners, please remember that you have permission to scrapbook your way.